welcome to another episode of The Real Review. This is me, Peppermint. I'm here with my fabulous bestie, Caswell, and we are talking about all things Real World Homecoming. They've reunited the original 7 into the original house, and here we are talking about it. It's a 6-episode miniseries. If you hadn't gotten a chance to see it, go back and watch. It is a doozy. Episode 5 is it's rumbling up. It has all this energy. I'm excited by it. It felt like a long episode for some reason. And I'm just excited to get into it. So here we are. What's going to happen? Is it going to be an all-out fight? Are the roommates going to start having sex? I don't really know, but you will find out on this episode of The Real Review. Hit it.
This is the true story. True story.
Of 7 strangers picked to live in a loft.
And nearly 30 years later, talk about it.
And have their lives taped.
To find out what happens.
What?
When people stop being polite. Could you get the phone?
And start getting real.
The Real World with Peppermint.
All right, so we are episode 5. 5 of 6 episodes, only one more to the finale. I'm so excited. Caswell, welcome back again. How you doing, my dear love?
You know, I'm always in a good mood when I'm recording with my queen, my African queen. Peppermint, let's go put that crown on, baby. I'm good. No complaints.
Yeah. Well, this episode was... I'm pretty good. This episode was a good one. And I know that the last episode, we were kind of like waiting to see. I just feel like, unfortunately, because it was so short, there's not that many storylines they could bring in. This one does continue to revolve around Becky, but they actually address that. And so I'm good. I'm happy to jump right in. Everybody, this episode is something that I think you should see because there's actually sort of the aftermath of what happens after an argument, which we don't always get to see. The episode starts in the aftermath of Becky leaving the house, and we're in the thick of conversation with each of the roommates discussing how they feel about whether or not Becky should return to the house after Kevin poses the question, should someone reach out to her? We found out later on that the house is split, with Kevin and Julie being concerned and wanting to reach out to Becky, and Norm and Andre being completely indifferent. And Heather and Eric kind of, say la vie, They're like, bye, peace. What did you think about that? It was interesting to see Heather. I was shocked to see Heather be as bye bitch as she was.
I think that Heather's position was, I'm an adult, you're an adult. I'm going to treat you like you're an adult. You chose to leave, and you're not sick with COVID like Eric is. So if you want to communicate with us, you don't have to pick up the phone or Skype. You can come right here, and we can sit down and have an adult conversation. So if I happen to be here for that, if I happen to be here for your Skype call, then fine. If I'm not, fine. But I'm not going to baby you. And I felt that's where she came from, and I felt that.
Mm-hmm. I agree. In the midst of the conversation, we find out that while the 3 roommates reached out to make amends with Becky, she only responded to one and made a meeting with Julie. And Kevin expressed that his feelings were hurt. Kevin and Norm expressed that their feelings were hurt. Kevin more so that Norm, because we as we know, Norm and Becky have been friends this entire time, and apparently they've been relatively close. And so Norm says that his feelings were hurt that Becky was kind of throwing their friendship out, under the bus. And Kevin saying, I've still got some unfinished business. I have a lot to say, and I want to make sure that we are able to get some closure. Kevin actually was saying, and I don't know if you caught this, was kind of almost threatening to leave if he didn't get to talk to Becky, because he was like, I want to leave. I don't know if you caught that. And then he was saying, I want to have closure. I need to have closure because this has haunted me for so many years. So what did you think about the fact that Julie was the only one who got a response from Becky?
Well, I think that Julie tries to be understanding to everybody, and that's a characteristic that is very obvious. So I think that it's easier to warm up to Julie because she's going to be the least judgmental most of the time. I I also thought it was interesting how Heather B was talking about how Julie is a control freak, and she brought up the examples of Julie would go through the trash to find the notes that the producers left.
We never knew that. That was tea. That was tea.
Yeah, that was so. I kind of feel like I feel. I could see how Julie wanting to take control and meeting up with Becky was in some ways her taking control of the situation for herself. So I'm glad she did it, but I also feel like she still remained neutral when she talked to Becky. But I think Julie also knows that Becky is not, her opinion is not malleable. She cannot change it. She's stuck in it, and she will stick by defending her opinion as opposed to trying to have a different consideration, of the consequence of her actions. So, I don't know even where to start because I was really disappointed about a lot in this episode. Not that the episode disappointed me, but just kind of made me disappointed about life. Because by the end of the episode, I don't know if you want me to get into Kevin's talk yet, but
no, I don't want to get to the end of the
okay.
Not yet. Let's keep where we are. So you feel like it's understandable that Becky only responded to Julie, and because the other roommates seem to have the roommates who reached out to her because they wanted to do it with an open heart. Granted, we don't know what they said in the text. We don't know how they reached out to her. We obviously don't know exactly how Becky was. Up until this point, we didn't know how Becky was feeling about getting a text from the roommates. She never seemed to acknowledge it. It seems like maybe she just ignored those communications. And so, you said your opinion about it. Like, you're right. Julie definitely was more of the, honestly, like the more of the diplomat in the house. And I can identify with Julie because I feel like that would be me. I don't know if I'd be going through trash, but I would definitely be like, it would be important for me. I guess I get reinforcement from our family being okay and our family being together. And it sounds like when Julie was sitting down and saying it's okay if we don't actually tie it up with a pretty bow was not so much her telling the rest of the house that. Maybe it was more her telling herself that. Anyway, house life resumes after Heather declares that nobody should spoil happy hour. Cheers!
I love how she ended that with that too. I love how she ended that.
And she wants to just move on. And we get to see never before seen clips of Heather telling the house that while she wants everyone to get along, she cannot herself be wasting energy on arguing with people. She said that she will tell you how she feels to your face, and that'll be that, pretty much. And Heather's a real one, And so I really love getting to see this old footage of them, never before seen footage. I'm all for it. So anyway, the next day, it's a fresh start. We get to see the roommates gathered around for another hot potato message, saying that while in 1992, they were brave to put it all out there, there were unintended consequences in the house because of all the drama. And then we see a clip of Norman discussing his sexuality in much more depth, revealing that an apparent attraction to both men and women. And it's really interesting. When the series first came out, Norman was kind of introduced indirectly as the bisexual character. And then that kind of morphed into him being gay. And then the little we've heard him talking about himself over the past few years, and I did an interview with him, he refers to himself as gay. So it's really interesting to see where he was in that moment, talking about being bisexual. But Norm was definitely an icon of sorts. There really weren't a lot of people, and Norm said it in this season in his interview that there wasn't all these queer people that were out doing their thing. And so next we find out that Norman faced a lot of rejection after coming out on basically our national television and returning home. And so that made me really feel for Norman. What do you think?
I felt maybe a tear in the first process of welling up and pushed out from my cold heart. You know what? I totally forgot that he had claimed to be bisexual. Then he said, I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. He said bisexual. But I feel like, yes, there are definitely bisexual people. We know them. I know them. I'm not, and I'm not going to argue with anyone that tries to say, oh, that's just what they say before they come out. But that is also what people say before they come out too. I think I did that. I think one of my other best friends did that. It's because especially when you were coming out in the '90s, you kind of had to ease into it, dip your toe in the water, tell people slowly. It wasn't like it is now that it's much easier for people to expose their identity than it was 29 years ago. So when he said that he went home and he felt rejection, was that because his family is like around the church? Because I wasn't totally sure of what he meant. Was it just homophobia, or was it also? But it was also the combination with gays saying like you're not really bisexual. It seemed to be both, right?
I think it seemed to be both. They kind of mixed it all up. Norm talked about being teased and bullied as a youngster, which is why Norm took the position and maybe why Norm came out the way that he did. But also saying that he had a mother who would defend him from all those bullies as a kid. And then later on, he said he felt self-shame having to actually tell because his mother would be like, he's not gay. And then later on, he felt shame having to tell his mother, yes, in fact, Mom, I am. But aside from that, he did mention that, I think as an adult coming back, because obviously he had a sense of community, he mentioned that when he went back and the people that he had known for his life, maybe family, friends, and definitely gay people that he knew as an adult, were kind of over him and distancing themselves from him. And I think that's, but the straight folks can, I guess, distancing themselves because he's queer, and the gay folks distancing themselves because he didn't say he was fully gay,
You can't make everybody
him
happy.
him not being able to be exactly who everybody wants him to be. But he did speak a lot about the erasure that happened in the gay community, especially in the early 90s, when it was seen as sort of cowardly not to declare that you're fully gay. And I just think that that's a shame, because Norman was a very big part of why in the 90s in popular culture, why gay folks were more accepted through popular culture. Norman was on MTV. The MTV we had a whole generation named after MTV. What the programming that MTV had was at a time always cutting edge, always groundbreaking. They were always kind of the first. They were certainly the biggest and the loudest. And so the Real World was pioneering. So anything that happened on the Real World, everyone was watching. Everyone wanted to know what was happening. And so, it was really interesting to see Norm in that situation where he didn't feel like he was a pioneer, even though he was, because I was looking up to him as a young queer kid. And then to find out that not only was he just gay and queer or whatever, he was also a pioneer in the world of AIDS activism. He was a part of ACT UP, and he was also a part of Queer Nation. I remember in our little interview together, Norm had mentioned that he was actually doing work with ACT UP when he got chosen to be cast on The Real World, and he had to leave ACT UP to do The Real World. And for those who don't know, check it out. Do yourself a favor and watch How to Survive a Plague. ACT UP was one of the very few organizations on the East Coast. There was a couple on the West Coast that were, taking their lives literally into their own hands to get the medications that they need, the AIDS medications that they need, because the government was basically shunning and ignoring the AIDS crisis that was happening, and thousands of people were dying. But since they were mostly black and gay men, it was not of any urgency in our government. Not until Rock Hudson died years later. And so did you know that he was a big part of ACT UP? And do you have any connections with anybody who, because we're not teenagers. And so we were alive during the height of the AIDS epidemic and AIDS crisis. And do you have any memories or anything that kind of that resonates with you from youth that you remember? I mean, I know you were young. You weren't like, some adult, in the scene necessarily. But do you have any memories of that?
I mean, it was just a really scary time, and in the beginning stages in the 80s, people didn't know how you got it. Didn't know if you got it from like kissing somebody or brushing up against them, and then it was just really scary. I also remember there was like a turning point in which it was declared a gay genocide because Ronald Reagan would not even say the word AIDS, and no one in our government was talking about it. And they didn't care. You're absolutely right. They didn't care that the majority of people that were dying were gay men. So, that's how that gave birth to ACT UP, because the government wasn't listening to us. So they made themselves known. I remember, as a young teenager, I don't remember how old I was when I first heard of ACT UP, but they were the ones that would be like, they would just have like makeout sessions in public, or just to show, look, we're gay, we're really here. So they'd have different gay couples kiss in different places, like in a mall and stuff like that. Yeah, all different types of like really cool demonstrations. And is it Michelangelo Signorelli? Is that his name? Do you know who I'm talking about?
Michael Signorelli.
Michael Signorelli, yeah, okay. I saw him talk at Clark University before, when I was like a sophomore in high school. So yeah, he was. I think he. I don't actually. If he was the leader of ACT UP or what the president or whatever, but it was a really scary time, and ACT UP was a force to be reckoned with, and a lot of other groups have learned from ACT UP and the way that they handle getting the attention they need to solve a problem. So,
yeah, and so I'm really it's when we talk about the legacy of the people on this show, and I had a conversation with our friend Trace Lissette the other day, and we were just like saying, wow, the significance and the impact. Of course, nobody knew exactly what they were getting into when they started this show, but the impact and the significance and the legacy and the mark that this show has and has left and has made, and the quality of people that they were bringing on to the show then versus a lot of the reality TV shows that we see now. It's just night and day, Well, Go ahead.
By the time the Real World got into I don't know, the fourth season, or maybe it was like, okay, so we're casting. How many abs do you have? How much?
Yeah, it was a little later than that.
How hot are you?
Yeah, I think it was a little later than that. It was probably. I think it started to change around Boston, But the first 4 seasons, definitely New York, L.A., San Francisco. The first 3 were certainly, the most deep. It got a little bit stupid around Miami. London, I think, was okay, but anyway, you're right. The later it got, the more ridiculous. Certainly by the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th season, it was literally just who wants to have sex in a hot tub.com. Later in the loft, though, we do see Andre and Kevin having a heart-to-heart, and Kevin is still obviously very disturbed about what went down with Becky. And Norm is starting to feel kind of guilty about not having gotten to connect with Becky, and actually, feeling guilty about telling her to shut up. Andre and Heather are still completely unbothered. Heather called Becky a time thief, which I thought was really a good way to describe it. Andre and Heather kind of saw eye to eye that Becky was a time thief, and that if she knows where the door is, she can always walk right back through it. Basically, is what Andre was saying. And so I can appreciate that, because the time in the house is so limited, and so we don't want to spend it only talking about one person, even though we kind of are. The next morning, we get to see Andre and learn a little bit more about his connection to his wife and his daughter. And Kevin explains that he was never successful in love and needed to be in the house to witness Andre's display of healthy love language with his wife, which is actually really beautiful. And Heather's relationship with her husband. And we get to learn that Kevin is kind of a romantic, and wants to be married, and is hell-bent on he will be in love again, and we will find true love. What do you think about that? Are you going to find true love?
I think they were just desperate for a storyline. So let's Kevin wants to find a wife, so let's talk about it. Like, I just felt like they were grasping at straws. I didn't really find it particularly interesting. I mean, and like, I think he's probably lonely, which is understandable, and then to solve that problem, he'll get married and have a partner, and probably, you know, sees other people that are partnered up and don't deal with the same sense of loneliness you do when you're single and during quarantine. So it really didn't put a dent on me at all. I was like, okay, this is like
it's not unique.
The second
I
half.
don't think that they were making something up. I mean, you know, I think his loneliness is probably real. It read as authentic to me, and I feel like we were getting to know something about one of the roommates in the house that we don't really know much about. All we took from Kevin in the 90s is he's black, he's a poet, and he screams racism. That's all we know. That's all they gave us. They didn't really give us much of how he feels about things or who he really is. And so it's nice to see, you know, what he thinks about relationships and partners and love and stuff like that. And so I agree with you. It is boring, I guess, and kind of, you know, everyone wants to find companionship, but I did appreciate, after hearing so much about Becky, being able to hear a little bit more about the lives of the other, what they've been through. I didn't know that he was married.
Sure.
And it only lasted 3 years. Oh, that's longer than any relationship I ever had. Just then, in comes a new message saying that while conflict and arguments are natural, the ones in the loft were weaponized. And then we get to see the roommates in a water gun fight, and then having a water gun fight in the house, which I think was a nice moment of levity. I actually am always entertained by seeing people in water gun fights. I don't know why. Do you ever squirt anyone with your water gun?
Flotilla DeBarge used to go around with a squirt gun when she was doing a show and squirt people when they didn't tip or clap for her. And a few fights have broken out. She squirted Princess Diandra. This is one time I just moved to New York City and she squirted Princess Diandra, and Princess Diandra was there like in half drag, like she had nails and eyeliner on, but she was dressed like a boy. She had some Bill Cosby sweater on, short hair, and I didn't know who she was, and I'm just gotta tell you the story. So she got all drunk and she started fighting with Fatilla, and then she grabbed the mic from Honey Dijon, and then Honey Dijon turned it off. She threw it at Honey Dijon, she broke, and I just moved to New York City, I put my hand on her shoulder. I'm like, you really have to leave. Don't touch me, you what? Did this, and then she went like this down my face, and her nail sliced open my lip, and I tasted the blood pour into my mouth. Ooh. And once I just tasted that, I just went into
rage?
Fight or flight, and I punched her. Like, I didn't even think about it. I wasn't trying to prove a point. It was just natural, nonviolent person. I just, like, decked her really quick, as hard as I could, right in the face. And she fell down, and she grabbed me down, and we're on the floor. And I'm like, it was I'm like this on her. And she's like this on me. And I was like, and they pulled us apart. And she was like, I'm going to kill that white faggot. She said that. I mean, those are her words, I know. But I'm not saying she's whatever. And so they kicked her. She waited outside. She was waiting outside for me. She's like, I'm going to stay right here. I know that boy is off 4 a.m. And she was there when I left. I didn't find out till later that she was out there waiting for me. I didn't know, and I had no idea who she was. And then the next day I went to Lux in Brooklyn, that new club, that Larry Tea Party, and I went in, and they're like, oh my God, you're legendary. Everyone's talking about the fight you got into with Princess Diandra. I'm like, who's Princess Diandra? It was a guy with, like, it was, I was like,
but have you worked with her? Have you worked with her since then?
That was my first time meeting her, and I didn't know. I didn't know. After that, she's like,
that's the only time you've ever been around.
We worked a brunch together, or some bingo party, and someone brought up the fight, and they left. She goes, Caswell, when you hit me, I swear to God, I saw stars. I was like, and I was like, she's like, don't go hitting people. But she was like nice to me. Like we smoothed everything over. I'm sure she knew she was drunk, and has a reputation.
She knew she
anyway,
was.
I forgot what we were talking about. Oh, yeah, real world.
Okay, yeah, real world. Well, we did get to see the lighter side of the roommates in the house. And Heather professes that while Kevin was usually the grumpy one, she was happy to see that he did have fun in the house sometimes. And because they were looking at that old clip of them doing squirt guns and everything. And so Heather, Kevin, and Norm go down to the Stonewall bar here in New York City, the legendary Stonewall, and Norm gets to tell them the story of the Stonewall Uprising, how it's considered the birthplace of the modern gay liberation movement. And we get to see the roommates encounter a Black Trans Lives Matter march and rally that takes place in front of the Stonewall every single Thursday, and then makes its way eventually on the street past the loft, which I thought was a really, I just thought that was a great moment for them to engage in. How did that affect you? Did you have any opinion?
I'm up for trans and non-binary people getting airtime at any given moment, and obviously I don't live in New York anymore, and those are some things that I miss about being in New York, and it was good to see. I just so much in this show just seems to be like heavy-handed for the sake of being heavy-handed. So I have mixed feelings about it. I'm also I'm just gonna be honest with you. I'm already having like kind of a hard time like with the show in the sense that I'm not used to seeing people 30 years later and then I'm not that person that breaks out the picture book and talks about the past. For some reason it makes me uncomfortable. I don't like to do that. I don't like to think about the past. So when this happens, and this was during a part of my life that I'm such a different person now, something about it makes me sad. And I think I know partly why, but it's also just like,
is that bad?
Is what bad? That it makes me sad?
Yeah.
I mean, kind of. I just want to enjoy the moment and not like reminisce and be like, oh, who we were back then, and like look at it, like, and not that they're like being corny about it necessarily, anything like that, but like a lot of this isn't feel good for me, and I've been hungry for that. Like, okay, I'm gonna be completely honest. You want that?
I want it in like one nutshell because we want to stay
right,
under an hour.
I'm gonna keep my mouth shut.
Okay. Well, look, I mean, let's keep it moving, and then I'll respond to some of that. We get a chance to hear the roommates reflecting on all the issues that they dealt with in the house, not realizing at the time how important they were, and they were engaging in things like the gay rights movement, reproductive rights, political marches, pro-choice rallies, conversations on racism. And so in that regard, it was very serious. It was very heavy. And I think it's either this or that for a lot of people. It's either, I don't want to think about anything serious. Just show me people fucking in a hot tub, and that's all I want to see. And that's what the show came. And then it could have it became so nothing that I don't even know when it got canceled. Like The Real World. It just became so like, I really don't care who these people are. They're just having sex in a hot tub. It's just people getting drunk and vomiting, and they're just trying to have a good time. People just trying to have a good time. Everybody understands that feeling of trying to have a good time. But when we watch people on TV just trying to have a good time, and that's all they do, then it gets to be too much. So I think any extreme is too much. I know that there's some people who are like, don't ever show me anything real. I just want to have a good time. But they didn't know that they were doing that then. Now, this time around, you're right. They do know that they are consciously talking about serious topics and issues, and they know that they're going back and revisiting those things, and there is something to be said for wanting to move on. But I do like the fact that if this were like The Real World Homecoming and just a bunch of 50-year-olds in a bikini trying to act like they're having a good time in a hot tub, I wouldn't be interested in seeing them do that either.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah. And then I have one for you.
Okay, we skipped over it a little bit when we talked about when Julie met Becky, but when Becky was like, I felt like I was.
We haven't even talked about that yet. We haven't talked about that. It's next. I'm going in order of the thing. The next thing that happens, it was the water guns, and then they watched the thing, and then the next thing that happened is Julie goes out and meets Becky. So, if what you have to say is about Julie meeting Becky, then hold on, because it's coming up. Hold on to your seat. My question for you is, was The Real World Season 1 ahead of its time?
It was right on time.
That's fair. That's real. So Julie, after all of this, Julie decides to go and have a conversation with Becky one-on-one. This is that conversation. We knew that she mentioned she had a date, but now she's going to the date. And Becky complained that she's hurt and that she's upset that no one came to her defense. And so she decided to stay out of the house, but wants to make one last appearance, potentially on screen or on the phone, to speak in front of the roommates and let them know what's on her mind. Andre thinks that. Go ahead. So, what do you think? What do you think about that? What do you go ahead and say what you're going to say? Like, what do you think about the meeting? What do you think about how Becky was acting in the meeting? And what do you think about the idea of Becky confronting the housemates remotely?
I wonder if Becky believes what she says when she says that she felt ambushed, that they brought up a topic from the show that they were all on. Like, of course they were going to bring up the show, and of course they were going to bring up the most intense moments of the show. No one was like trying to like, here, let's make the white lady look like racist. Like no one was attacking you, but she was like, I didn't know that they were going to do that. I didn't know that this was going to be brought up. It's like, are you dumb?
That's not what I signed up for. I was like, what are you doing? Well, exactly. I don't want to see Becky sitting around in a hot tub trying to be like, life is good, and not acknowledging what happened in the house before. I came back to the show to see them get some closure on what. Of course they're going to bring up old clips. Of course they're going to bring up these conversations. These were some of the biggest conversations on the show. These were some of the biggest conversations on the series, because later on they were just, again, talking about kids vomiting and getting drunk. And then there were some of the biggest conversations about this on TV. Trace was right. Kevin was right. I don't remember in the 90s seeing a conversation where a black man could get in the face of a white woman and raise his voice about race and calling her a racist and things like that without him suffering. And I'm not saying that he didn't suffer. But then I started watching I recently was binging Melrose Place, and it's funny. They took a lot of the things that were happening on The Real World in 1992. When they came out with Melrose Place in 1993, they put those things on Melrose Place.
I mean, they applied the same controversies to Melrose Place?
I can't say they applied the controversies, but they had the same storylines about race and about things like that. You know, they didn't go in the way that The Real World did. And it certainly wasn't the same impact. But they addressed it in this, you know, it's like they were taking, let's talk about that. And they kind of added, I know, what I'm saying is I know that The Real World influenced other TV shows that were very popular, is my point. So, Andre, we get to see, this is one moment that is kind of, ooh, this is very real. We get to see, Andre he thinks he's alone, and he walks into the bedroom and he starts complaining about Becky on the phone to his wife. And then you can see on that moment, he's like, Becky was being such a, I gotta go. And he like hung up. It was like totally like, he realized the Loft 2.0 has been upgraded Big Brother style, where the cameras are like not only a camera person, but there was like a camera. We couldn't see what it was, but you know, the camera was like under him in a shelf or in a hidden book or something. I don't know, but he was shocked to see it and was like, oh, and then he got caught. And I think that's so funny.
So he was thinking that the only time there's a camera on him is when there's a camera guy next to him.
That's what it was in 1992. The only time they had cameras in 1992 was people holding them. They didn't start doing those mechanical, like, in the wall, hidden mirror, behind the mirror things until later. And then they were already out of the house. So then when he found that there are some of those in there, I think he was like, he gagged. Because he was ready to spill tea. And then you could see him, he was like, Becky's such a, I gotta go. Hello. So Becky, and after all the anticipation, Kevin and Becky sit down for a one-on-one video chat that quickly blows up again, and Becky is still hurting and not able to have a constructive conversation that will help bring closure. And Kevin is unable to make his point to Becky before she completely hangs up on him. What do you think about how their conversation went? I know he wanted to have a one-on-one with her. I really wish that he hadn't done that. I wish that they had just done the group thing. What do you think?
You mean done a group call instead of a one-on-one?
Well, she seemed to be saying that she was open to either coming back to the house. She was open to having a conversation and talking with the group and saying what she needed to say to the group. She said, according to Julie, let's do a FaceTime where I just didn't see the whole group. And then the other roommates complained about that. If you remember, Andre was like, if she can do a FaceTime, she can come here and talk and see us face to face. So obviously the thought was, we're open to it, but it's probably better if she's here. And then Kevin was like, okay, but before any of that, let me get to her on the phone one-on-one. And so what I'm saying is that one-on-one conversation with Kevin is probably put a stop to her doing anything with the group.
Yeah, it didn't. I'm sure it didn't set the mood for her to want to continue having conversations with anyone.
That's what I'm saying.
House.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that conversation went? It seemed like Kevin it didn't end amicably. It did not end in a friendly way. It didn't seem like either one of them. It didn't seem like they were like seeing eye to eye. She hung up on him, and so how could they have avoided that?
I really felt for Kevin on that because I think Kevin's struggle is he's trying to be empathetic and considerate and let her speak, yet at the same time he cannot allow the bullshit to slide. Like he really cannot allow the bullshit to slide. And I understand that. Like I understand and you hear them and like she is so. That whole conversation made me feel like, okay, I just got to accept it, right? Racism's here to stay. Like, we ain't gonna solve it because
I think
she ain't gonna change it. Like she ain't gonna change. She cannot even for a second do some self-reflection.
It really is terrible, and unfortunately, Kevin. I don't think that Kevin was the most successful at following his own advice when earlier in the show, he said we have to meet people where they are. If Becky is the kind of person that has a short temper and instantly gets offended and you can only say 3 words to her before she's flying off the handle, then you better choose those 3 words strategically. And I think that he knows what to say to get Becky to start yelling and screaming and walk out. He knows what to say to get her to leave the apartment. He already knows that. I feel like he was basically saying the same exact thing and taking the same exact approach as before. And I think you have to switch up your angle. You have to change your vibe. Switch up how you do it. If you know that this person he's like, no, Becky, what you're doing is wrong. If you know that she's not going to react well to that, then you can't be like, Becky, what you do? You can't do that. You have to do it in a different way. There is a way to get your idea across without doing the same way. And I think that he just doesn't have that many different tactics. He's got the best ideas, but his delivery is the same every time. And I think she just can't take it.
Well, the thing about people like Becky is the more you say, the less they hear. So for him to go on and try to explain to her calmly why she was wrong, or talk about
which he was trying to do
that book, which he was trying to do, but I could tell his heart was racing, like doing it. I think he probably like let's say she just went off about whatever, I'm a victim of this, I'm that, and then he didn't say anything, and then she stopped, and if he just said, I politely disagree, and I think you should really do some self-reflection, and then she would have just been left with that. That's it,
I think so. I think
she would have respected that more.
I think she probably would have respected that more because he can't. I mean, the impact of what he did, and they did talk about like intent versus impact a little bit in this show. The impact of what he did was she was like, "You're just trying to change me. You're just trying to change me." Like that's all she could hear. And it's like, bitch.
Total Trump supporter mentality.
You
wanna change me?
I don't know
it
that
is
she's a Trump supporter, but But part of the
mentality,
thing
I'm
that
saying.
Oh, okay. Part of that thing that we have to acknowledge is that there's people in the middle, people like Becky, who are at a certain place where they are. They're not fully with us. Like, we're not on the same page. They're on a different page. They're not on the other page. But they're on a different page. But the problem is, if we don't get them over to our page, then we could lose them to the other page. That makes sense. And
Becky's the kind of person. Becky's the kind of person that voted for Biden because she wanted him to be the president. You know
I think that's kind of an insult to people who there are different. I wouldn't necessarily lump. I'm
okay with insulting people. That's fine.
That's quite general. It's not very specific, but that's how you characterize it. That's cool. I don't know how she voted. She might be the kind of person that might vote one way, but all I know is what comes out of her mouth, and what she says out of her mouth gives me the signals that she's not really able to have the conversation to the extent, and the difference these days, probably between now and 1992, is that you could just say your piece and be out. I mean, we have freedom of speech in this country. You can say what you want. But in 1992, when it came to conversations on race and racism and even homophobia, the dominant culture was people who were cisgender, white, heterosexual, and, Republican, honestly. And so when a white lady speaks and she could say, I don't agree with homosexuality, that would be the end of the conversation. You know what I mean? I think, I'm not racist, but I don't believe black people should have this or that, and I don't like the way you're being an angry black man, and that's the end of the conversation. I'm not a racist. It could end there in 1992. But these days, we're holding people to a higher level of accountability. And so we can't engage the way that we did in 1992. If you're going to get in the ring, you're not leaving until it's over these days, until the conversation is over. And, that's how that is. Hello. Anyway, so the episode leaves off Becky not coming back into the house. It pretty much stops right there. After Kevin's conversation with Becky, it pretty much gets cut short. And we have left to find out what's going to happen in the final episode. It does seem like Becky wants some coddling. It does seem like Becky, she's hanging around in New York. So it does seem like she's waiting for them to reach out to her. And that she wants them to have this big come to Jesus moment where they we beg you, Becky, we needed you. And I don't know if she's going to get that.
You think that's what she wants? You think that's what she wants? You think that she wants to...
I think she would entertain that.
For everyone to beg her to come back? You think that's what...
I think she would entertain that.
So she's like that boyfriend or girlfriend that gets upset, leaves the party, and runs off just so the boyfriend can run after her.
I don't know. I really don't know her. I've never met her. I'm not sure, but I do believe that she wants to be. Look, on some level, she has a connection with these people in the house. They all have been in touch for the past 30 years. She's obviously a part of the show, and she came back for a reason. And so I guess my question is, what is the real reason she came back?
This is the check, baby.
Maybe it is.
That's the reason.
Whatever it is, we are going to find out next week on the finale episode of Real World Homecoming Season 1. All I know is after this, and you may not agree with me, I am ready for Los Angeles. I am ready for Tammy. I am ready for John. I'm even ready for Dominic. I'm ready to see LA in the house and see how they would do it, because Tammy is not the one. Okay? And so I'm ready for it. I don't know. Thank you all for watching. Oh, go ahead, Caswell. Go, say something.
I don't want to see anybody else 30 years later.
Okay, sounds good.
I need a break.
You don't have to watch. I'll be watching. In the meantime, thank you all for watching this show. Hopefully you all like this show enough. I know that Caswell wouldn't watch it, but I'm glad that you are watching the show and watching us. Make sure you follow Caswell right here and follow, like, subscribe this page, share this thing. We want to get more views on this. I'm trying to try some new stuff. If you're enjoying watching this, then I could really use the help you all sharing this and helping me spread the word that I'm doing all kinds of stuff like this, because Peppermint likes to talk, y'all. Caswell, you're amazing. I love you so much. Thank you for joining me. Only one episode left to go, and then you are free.
Anytime.
I love you.
I'm
All right,
looking for
everybody.
you, honey.
Bye.